The year 2000 problem, commonly known as the millennium bug, is a story that's really been flooding the media in recent months. Now, why is this simple coding problem so important? Well, because if solutions are not enacted in time, this simple data entry shortcut threatens to bring the global economy literally to its knees at 12:01 a.m., January 1st, 2000.
Yeah. Earl Chrysler, the director of School of Business's MBA program at Quinnipiac College in Connecticut, speaks with AFTN's Mike Tucker about the genesis of this problem and why the business world should fear the year 2000.
If you're a supplier to Prudential and your computer system will not be fully tuned up by the year 2000, beware. The insurance company may dump you.
If necessary, we'll actually make a business decision to look for an alternative partner, meaning that we will not be able to continue to work with that partner that we depend on.
One expert sees a computer plight in military terms.
If you think of it as waging a battle, supply lines are everything. A terrific fighting group can only do so much if they aren't supplied. They can only last so long.
Big companies are getting anxious because many of their smaller suppliers are behind deadline in the race to fix the so-called year 2000 glitch, the bug that causes computers to misread the 2 zeros to mean 1900 instead of 2000.
We are getting every indication from our supplier that they are taking this program seriously. We remain concerned that their suppliers and their suppliers' suppliers may not be prepared. So we are going overboard on communicating a sense of urgency.
Automakers cannot afford to easily ditch partners because it takes a year to find, test, and nurture a new supplier. As the clock ticks, the rush to get everyone up to speed has sparked an unusual degree of cooperation among big companies. The big three have teamed up, as have the local phone companies, to prod unprepared suppliers so that the laggards don't disrupt the food chain.
Earl, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike.
We've got this major problem, the millennium problem, the Y2K problem. Is it a software problem or a hardware problem?
Well, it could be both, Mike. There are algorithms for converting the date from the standard month, day, and year format into, we'll say, day of year and year. And these kinds of algorithms can be pre-programmed on a chip, in which case you can use this kind of a chip in a piece of equipment such as data transmission devices, ATM machines, electronic cash registers. But that kind of a problem is minor. If there was going to be a problem, they could really just remove the chip, reprogram it, put it back in, and everything would be taken care of. So the problem is not in the hardware arena, it's in the software area.
If it were in the hardware, we could replace the hardware, right?
That's correct.
We've got a lot of different software systems, though, don't we?
Well, primarily they fall into two categories, Mike. One is called system software, and the system software is the programs that actually manage the resources of the computer and run the actual applications programs. Application software is the nuts and bolts of the data processing area. It's such things as accounts receivable, accounts payable, and that sort of thing. Well,
we're in the year 2000, Earl. What happens? Does the world come to an end?
I certainly hope not. The problem is that most of the people, when they originally designed systems, they put in 2 digits for the year field. This was primarily because many of the people figured that by the year 2000, that these programs that they were designing would be superseded by new programs, and that those people would take care of it by putting in a 4-digit field for year. Or in some instances, it just never entered their mind that the year 2000 was going to come, so to speak.
So the issue is really in applications then?
That's correct. There are some instances in the software area in terms of operating system software where the operating system date stamps and time stamps such things as transactions for an online system for a bank or something like that. Also, when a program creates a new file, it date and time stamps that file as to the date that it was created, And also, programmers can ask by certain things in their program that a date until which this file is saved can be written on the file so that no one could accidentally overwrite it. And so those kinds of things in the operating system software have to be examined. Now, the manufacturers of computers provide this system software. So if an organization is concerned about whether or not this can be a problem when the year 2000 comes, they should contact the manufacturer of their computer and ask them specifically if their operating system software is 2000 year compliant.
Will they know?
I would think that the operating systems people at the manufacturers would be right on top of that and be able to respond. Yes.
What if the manufacturer says it isn't?
Then I would say that we have a significant problem in the fact that those people at the manufacturer's organization should be responding to this kind of thing. And about the only thing that we could ask is how much will you charge to make it 2000 year compliant.
What happens in the year 2000 when you've got a computer program that really isn't compliant?
Well, as I said, when the system was originally designed, these people would have put in a 2-digit field for a year. Now, there are two ways in which a computer programmer could have this data stored, either as just a 2-digit field or a 2-digit field which is signed. If we had, we'll say, 1999, and we roll over to the next year, we go to 2000, which gives us 00 in this field. Now, if we wanted to figure elapsed time on something, we'll say from 1998 to this next year, we would take 98 and subtract it from the current year, which is 2000. If you had a signed field, you would subtract 98 from 00 and end up with a minus 98. If it wasn't signed, you'd subtract 98 from 00 and end up with 98. Either way, this presents a major problem.
Well, let's address the problem. What can we do? We know that we have a problem. We've got a couple years. Can you, Earl Chrysler, give us the solution?
Well, I can tell you the steps we should have to go through to approach this particular problem. The first thing that we'd have to do is we'd have to look at two things. One is the fact that the computer program would have to be changed, and it's possible that the data file would also have to be changed.
How do we go about doing that?
Well, we'd have to look at the program, and if the program has a 2-digit date field, and the programmer allowed this 2-digit date field to be stored in a manner which is called display, then this 2-digit field would take up 2 bytes in the record. However, there is another option, and that is you could call this field to be stored in a manner which is called computational 3, otherwise known as packed decimal. If it was stored in packed decimal form, we can actually put 4 digits in 2 bytes of storage. And I have a demonstration of that in my exhibit. If you'll take a look at Exhibit 3, it shows that the manner in which you store the data actually is represented in 2 different ways. Now, if the person who originally designed the system made a record layout, which is shown like in my Exhibit 1, then you can see all of the individual fields, and you'd look at it to determine which data resided where. And these names for these fields are what the programmer uses to access the data. If you take a look at Exhibit 2, it shows how that data actually looks out on a disk or tape file. Now, the thing that we have to do is either expand the year field to 4 bytes from 2, or we would have to redefine the field, if it has not been defined as computational 3, into computational 3. This would allow us to retain the same length record we had previously. However, if we have to expand it 2 more bytes, the other solution, then our record lengths do not conform to what they did previously, and that presents a significant problem.
Earl, the solutions that are available to us, these are cheap and easy solutions that you could probably address and correct in an hour or so?
I wish that were so, Mike. So do many firms. In fact, the Gartner Group consulting company has estimated the cost of correcting the year 2000 problem to consist of two components. They estimate the cost of actually curing the programs at $300 billion nationwide, and the cost of correcting the actual data files at an additional $300 billion nationwide. Now, the problem is not quite that simple, Mike. And one of the major reasons is that, say, for example, I was a programmer assigned to a new system, and I was told to write a particular program, and a brand new master file was going to be created as part of the system. What I do is I end up defining a set of names for the data fields, as I showed in Exhibit 1. Now, another programmer assigned to another program, which is part of the same system, may come up with a different set of names for exactly the same data fields. Also, maybe 6 months...
In a third programmer, in a fourth programmer.
6 months later, a year later, a user thinks of another use for this data, and the same thing happens again. A new set of names is designed for this. So this means that we now have a multitude of names for the exact same fields on a record, so that compounds the problem of locating this particular field in a record.
And we'll return to Earl in just a moment, but let's pause now to review some of the points he's made. The Millennium Bug is a problem centered in computer software systems. Now, unlike hardware, which can be expensive but relatively easy to replace, software programs that contain the Y2K glitch are predominantly programs that were custom designed for an organization's needs and therefore significantly more difficult to change.
The problem occurs in both the operating systems that run computer systems and in the applications that form the actual tools operators use. The problem began with the need to save space in the memories of early computers. By dropping 2 of the 4 digits in the year column and using 2 digits, 2-byte fields, programmers were able to economize. Eventually, as computers became more capable, it was reasoned that the shortcuts would be replaced by a full 4-digit field. Unfortunately, by the time the memory capacity was developed, the shortcut had become standard practice.
Another factor that complicates things is that for many years there was no standard naming conventions for labeling data fields. With no common frame of reference, the task of seeking out problem fields and replacing them with 4-digit, 2-byte fields becomes increasingly complex and is one that is almost impossible to automate. Each line of computer code must be checked by hand.
The estimated costs for solving this twofold problem have been stated by some as being as high as $600 billion, a daunting figure that is only made somewhat more palatable when compared to the possible costs of the catastrophic global failure predicted for the year 2000 if the problem is not corrected in time. Now let's get back to Earl and Mike.
There is a feature that's provided by the COBOL manufacturers, software developers, and it's called a source statement library. In the source statement library, a programmer takes a set of names for a particular record, and this set of names is stored under a name. Then, when the programmer wishes to use that set of names in a program, the programmer merely puts in a call to copy this code from the source statement library into his or her program. This is not only efficient on the programming standpoint, but it also makes for standardization that everyone is using the same set of names. There are some facilities that require this and others that don't, so it depends on the actual organization involved.
But in theory, this multiplication could have gone on for a very long time, and there could not be much in the way of historical record keeping.
That's correct. That's correct. And the other situation that we have is that even if we knew every record layout in which there was a year field, many times organizations have not established and enforced what they're called naming conventions that requires a programmer to follow a certain set of standards in the way they name fields. As a consequence, we don't know what to search for if we were able to actually look at those record layouts and try and find a particular field. If, for example, they had naming standards, you would find that, depending on the company, you would have some prefixes to it, but a year field would always end either in year, the word year, or YY, so that we would know what to search for. But when no standards have been involved, we're really at a total loss.
Earl, who oversees this process, and how does it get done? Do you hire a consultant?
Well, originally, if programming management had been very attuned to these kinds of techniques, there would have been a person that was assigned to the source statement library. And if I were going to write a program that accessed a file, I would come up to the librarian and I would say, do you have a record layout in the library for this particular file? And the person would say yes, and I would say, well, what is the name that I will use to copy into my program? And they give me that name. At the same time, this librarian would then say, all right, now, what's the name of your program that is going to use this file? That way, we would have two pieces of information. We would have the list of all of the files that are out there and the name of them. And we would also have a program file matrix which shows for each file which programs actually use that file. We would then be able to backtrack if someone said we have a problem with a particular file, and we would know every program that had to be addressed in that particular situation.
But that's in the ideal world, isn't it?
That's in the ideal world, Mike. The way the situation is now, someone says, well, how do you cure the problem? It's akin to that story, how do you make tiger stew? First you catch a tiger. Well, what we have to do now is a firm has to go through every record layout in every program and try to find the occurrence of a year field. And if it's only 2 digits, then it has to be changed. And then the program has to be recompiled, and then, of course, the actual data records have to be modified to match that, which is a totally separate problem. I'm primarily concerned with the software in terms of how do we cure the programs.
So what we do is go through this search, this massive search. Can corporations do that on their own? Do they have to hire consultants?
There are many firms, Mike, that have actually hired a large number of additional employees, and they have more or less a task force for the year 2000 problem, and those people are sort of on the side addressing that issue while the day-to-day activities are going on with their normal employees. Other firms are trying to bring in consulting companies to address this problem. The firms are having a little bit of a problem, however. It's my understanding that the big 6 CPA firms have decided not to address this issue on a consulting basis, and the primary reason is that the firms that want to hire them want a guarantee that there will be no problems when the year 2000 arises, and this is a tremendous liability to put on an organization. And so that's why some of the firms are backing away from this kind of consulting engagement.
Earl, if I'm listening to you, I might think to myself, I don't think we've got anything that's so dependent on dates that we need to go out and hire Earl Chrysler at $300 an hour to superintend this repair process. Why don't we just go into the year 2000, see what happens? Maybe we'll have a problem, maybe we won't. Is that a rational strategy?
It is, Mike, for small firms or an organization which doesn't have any date-dependent applications which are what you'd call mission critical or really important to the organization. In that case, it might be the best solution is just to hold tight onto the arms of your chair and wait. And then when something blows up and the system comes out with irrational numbers, go in and address the problem at that time.
So it may be that in the year 2000, we'd have a little problem instead of a big problem. Something might go wrong, but overall our systems are okay, and we bring in a repair crew and we repair that little problem and we just go on.
Well, that could be a solution for smaller organizations. However, it depends on how an organization wants to manage its MIS facility. To me, the year 2000 problem could be approached in perhaps a more short-term expensive way. and that is that we would take all record layouts for all files, and for each one of the files, use a set of naming standards that the organization develops. Develop the one master file record layout to put in a library, and then bring each program in and put in this new copied standard version of the record layout. Then you could take the program itself in, and since you had the old set of names, which was originally there, and now you have the standard set of names, you could just use a word processor to go through and do a search, and when you find the old name, do a replace with the new standard name. Now, admittedly, this is going to take a horrendous effort. I'm of the opinion that if a firm did this, that once it was done, and then they decided, now we're going to look for all the year fields, and we're going to address the problem, I think the efficiencies that they would realize then would probably compensate for all of the work that was done up front to get their files clean.
Would that be a more rational strategy then for a bank or savings and loan or larger company that really had date-dependent files?
Oh, yes, yes. And once this was done, the advantage is the fact that should anything happen in the future that was going to cause a change in any major field of a record, they now have all of the procedures in place whereby they can very easily go through, look at the program file matrix, find out which file is affected, know which programs are affected, go to the library, bring out that record layout, change the record layout, put it back in the library. They know which programs were affected. They bring in those programs. They recompile each one of them, copying in the corrected version of the record layout. And now everything is clean.
Earl, you talked about establishing naming conventions and source statement libraries. What if I'm a viewer and I'm thinking to myself, I don't think we did a very good job at that. Is the solution that you just spoke about the alternative for a group like that?
Yes, I would say that they're the ones that should think, okay, well, we made mistakes in the past, but now is an opportunity to clean up everything and start doing it right.
And that probably is going to be pretty expensive, isn't it?
Yes, I would say that it's going to be expensive, but I look at it this way, Mike. The approach that they're doing now is, I'd call it find and fix. And again, they're going to have to examine every record layout they have for every possible way some programmer could have represented the year field in the record. Then they're going to have to make a change to that. And that in itself is a horrendous effort because, as I said, the record layouts for a given file, there's not just one because of these programmers now coming up with their unique set of names for the fields. And so you might have 8 or 10 record layouts to look at for each file. And again, you have no standards, so you don't know what you're looking for.
Are there enough people in the world to solve this problem?
Oh, I'm sure there are, Mike. The major problem, I think, today is that the people are unsure of how to attack it. They understand they have a problem, and they're not sure where to start. And as a consequence, they're in a quandary. And I've talked with some folks who have said that in staff meetings for the last 2 years, every month or so, someone says, we have a year 2000 problem coming up. And they sit there and say, yes, we do. And then they just move on to the next agenda topic. They decided not to address it primarily because they didn't know how to address it.
Well, let me pose the question to you, Earl. We've just got a couple minutes. I'm a viewer, and I'm sitting here watching you, and I don't think we've done very much about this other than had it as an agenda item and passed it on for another time. Yes. What should we do? We're a fairly large American corporation. When we leave this meeting or viewing this tape to solve this problem, what specific steps should we take?
Well, again, I would think that the data processing or MIS people should look at all of the records and say, what files do we have that our programs process against? And then find the record layouts for each one of those files. I would then start out by developing a program file matrix so we know which programs are addressing each one of those files. Now, this is going to be a project. Then once that's done, they would then, in my judgment, be best off by going into each one of those programs, removing the record layout names now, developing a standard for that file, putting it in the library, throwing away the old and copying in the new, and then doing a search and replace old for new in each one of those programs. They then have a clean environment in which to start.
Guaranteed, Earl?
Sure.
Thank you, Earl.
It's been a pleasure, Mike.
A few final notes to consider before we move on to our next segment. The process of fixing the Millennium Bug will be an arduous one for most companies. An important point to remember is for a company to develop a source statement library that keeps records and data according to a set standard of organization. Unfortunately, many companies will skip over this step, complicating the fixes and making future program modifications more difficult.